What if time itself screamed, and no one in the Federation could hear it breaking? The stars are supposed to be constant, predictable, measured. That's what Starfleet teaches what it depends on. But what happens when every second begins to fracture? When clocks desynchronize across entire sectors? When events repeat, overlap, or simply vanish? And what if, at the center of it all, there wasn't a cosmic anomaly, but a man who hates time so much, he's willing to destroy it? Because somewhere between warp speed and infinity, something faster has arrived, and it's already too late to stop him. What if the first sign wasn't a battle, but a mistake no one could explain? It began quietly aboard the USS Enterprise. Not with alarms, not with explosions, but with confusion. Commander Data stood motionless at his console, golden eyes flickering ever so slightly as he processed a contradiction that should not exist. According to ship logs, the Enterprise had entered the Argilius system exactly 12 minutes ago, and yet, every crew member on the bridge distinctly remembered arriving over an hour earlier. Captain Picard frowned, his voice calm but edged with something deeper. "Mr. Data, are you suggesting our logs are incorrect?" "No, Captain," Data replied. "I am suggesting both records are correct." A silence followed, subtle, uneasy, the kind that creeps into your bones. Before you realize something is wrong, then it happened again. The stars outside the viewport flickered not like a malfunction, but like a skipped frame in reality itself. A heartbeat lost, a second erased. Geordi LaForge checked his instruments. "That's impossible. There's no spatial distortion, no temporal anomaly readings, nothing." But there was something moving faster than their sensors could track. What if the Federation's greatest minds couldn't detect the threat because it existed between moments? Across multiple star systems, reports began flooding in, starships arriving before they departed, entire colonies experiencing déjà vu on a planetary scale, conversations repeating word for word, then diverging into outcomes that made no sense. It was as if time itself had begun stuttering. At Starfleet Command, panic was carefully disguised as urgency. The best temporal physicists were assembled, including specialists who had studied every known anomaly from wormholes to time loops to quantum slipstreams, but none of it matched, because this wasn't a natural phenomenon, it was deliberate. And then, someone saw him. A science vessel near the edge of Federation space captured something on a high-speed sensor sweep. At first, it looked like static, a blur, but when slowed down frame by frame it revealed the impossible streak of red lightning, moving between seconds, a figure running. What if the moment they identified him was the moment they sealed their fate? The image was transmitted to every major command center. Analysts scrambled to understand it, to categorize it, to fit it into something familiar. But there was nothing familiar about this, until one officer, an expert in temporal incursions, spoke a name that didn't belong in their universe. Eobard Thawne. The room fell silent, because that name came from a classified archive records of cross-dimensional encounters. Brief, fragmented, almost mythological, a being from another reality. A speedster who didn't just move through time, but manipulated it, broke it, weaponized it, and worst of all, he enjoyed it. What if this wasn't an invasion, but a game? Far beyond Federation space, on the edge of a collapsing star, reality itself seemed to ripple. The vacuum of space twisted not violently, but unnaturally, like a page being rewritten faster than it could be read. And then he appeared. Eobard Thawne stepped out of nothingness, his yellow suit humming with energy that didn't belong in this universe. His eyes scanned the stars, a smile slowly spreading across his face. "So this is it," he murmured. "A universe that actually believes it understands time." He laughed. It echoed, not through space, but through moments, past, present, future, all at once. What if the greatest danger wasn't what he could destroy, but what he could change? Back on the Enterprise, Data suddenly froze. Not a malfunction, something else. His systems were processing an input that hadn't happened yet. "Captain," he said slowly, "we are about to be attacked." Picard stood by what? Data's eyes flickered again. "I do not know," he admitted, "but it is already happening." And then the ship shook violently, not from an external impact, but from within. Consoles exploded, lights flickered, crew members were thrown from their stations as something tore through the Enterprise at impossible speed. A blur, a streak of red lightning, gone before anyone could react. What if the attack wasn't meant to destroy them, but to send a message? On the main screen, for just a fraction of a second, a face appeared. smiling, watching, and then it vanished, leaving behind only one thing, a single phrase, burned into every system on the ship. "You're already too late." The stars outside stabilized, the shaking stopped, but something had changed. Data turned to Picard, his voice quieter now. "Captain, we have lost time." "How much?" Picard asked. Data paused. 3 days. The bridge fell into stunned silence, because no one remembered losing them. What if those missing days were only the beginning? What if those 3 missing days weren't lost, but stolen and used against them? The question echoed in Picard's mind as the Enterprise drifted in uneasy silence. 3 days, erased not from logs, not from memory alone but from reality itself. And the most terrifying part, somewhere, somehow, those days still existed. "Begin a full system-wide diagnostic," Picard ordered, his voice controlled but tight beneath the surface. "I want to know exactly what happened during those missing hours." But even as he spoke, a deeper realization crept in. What if the truth wasn't something they could simply recover? What if it had already been rewritten? Data accessed every subsystem simultaneously, his mind racing faster than any human could comprehend. "Captain, I am detecting residual chronometric distortions throughout the ship. They are layered." Riker asked. "Yes, Commander." As though multiple timelines briefly overlapped within this space, before collapsing into a single sequence. Geordi leaned over his console, brow furrowed. "You're saying we didn't just lose time? We lived through different versions of it?" Data turned his gaze toward him. "That is the most logical conclusion." A chill spread across the bridge. What if, in one of those timelines, they had already lost? Suddenly, Worf stiffened. "Captain, I am detecting a vessel on an intercept course." It appeared without warp signature. Picard straightened. On screen, the view screen flickered and revealed something that made even the most seasoned officers hesitate. It was the Enterprise, but not quite. The hull bore the same markings, the same structure, but it was damaged, scorched, fractured along its spine, like it had survived something catastrophic. And then, it fired. "Shields up!" Riker shouted. The blast struck before the command could even fully register. The Enterprise rocked violently, alarms screaming as systems struggled to compensate. "Return fire," Picard commanded. Phasers lashed out, striking the duplicate ship, but it barely reacted. "What is that thing?" Geordi muttered. Data's voice cut through the chaos. "Captain, I believe that vessel is us." Silence just for a moment, but it felt like an eternity. "What?" Riker snapped. Data turned toward the screen, his expression unchanged, but his tone carried something new. "Uncertainty. It matches our exact configuration, down to the quantum level. However, its temporal signature is offset by approximately 72 hours. Picard's eyes narrowed. 3 days. What if the enemy wasn't attacking them, but showing them their own future? The damaged Enterprise on the screen shifted position, not through warp, not through any known propulsion, but by simply being somewhere else. A blur of red lightning flashed across its hull, and suddenly, the truth became impossible to ignore. "He's controlling it," Picard said quietly. Another blast struck, stronger this time. The ship groaned under the pressure. "Shields at 60%, Worf reported. "What if this isn't a battle we can win, because it's already been decided?" Picard thought, gripping the arm of his chair. Then something changed. The duplicate Enterprise hesitated. For a fraction of a second, its weapons powered down, its engines flickered, and in that moment, a figure appeared on their bridge. Red lightning crackled as he stood there, completely still, completely calm, as if he had always been there. "Hello, Captain," he said with a smirk. Every officer froze. What if the most dangerous enemy is the one who knows your next move before you do? Worf lunged forward, but Thawne was gone before he could take a single step. A streak of lightning, a whisper of motion, and suddenly he was behind Data, examining him like a curiosity. "Fascinating," Thawne murmured, "an artificial life form trying to understand time. Tell me, do you dream in seconds, or do you just process them?" Data turned his head slowly. "You are Eobard Thawne." Thawne grinned. "Ah, good. At least someone did their homework." Picard stood. "You are responsible for these temporal distortions." "Distortions?" Thawne laughed, a sharp, mocking sound. "No, Captain, this isn't distortion." He stepped closer, his eyes gleaming with something far more dangerous than madness. "This is improvement. What if, to him, breaking time is just fixing it?" Riker clenched his fists. "You've attacked this ship. You've endangered countless lives." "Endangered?" Thawne interrupted, suddenly right in front of him. "Commander, I've ended entire timelines for less than what you call a bad day. Trust me, this is restraint." The crew exchanged glances, fear creeping in despite their discipline, because they could all feel it now. This wasn't just an enemy. This was something else entirely. "What do you want?" Picard demanded. Thawne turned back to him, tilting his head slightly, as if considering the question. "Want?" he repeated. "That's the funny thing about time, Captain. It's not about what you want." He gestured toward the viewscreen, where the damaged Enterprise still lingered, flickering between existence and non-existence. "It's about what already happened. What if everything they were doing right now was exactly what he planned?" Suddenly, Data spoke again, his voice urgent. "Captain, I am detecting a massive temporal surge originating from within the ship." "Where?" Picard demanded. Data's eyes widened just slightly. "Everywhere." The lights dimmed. The air itself seemed to ripple, and for a brief, horrifying moment, everyone on the bridge saw something different. Picard saw the Enterprise in ruins. Riker saw himself giving an order he didn't remember making. Worf saw battle glorious but doomed. And Data saw nothing at all. What if the future wasn't being changed, but erased? Thawne watched them, his smile widening as chaos unfolded around him. "Oh, this is where it gets interesting," he said softly. The ship lurched again harder than before. Consoles exploded, systems failed, and the duplicate Enterprise outside began to tear apart, as if being undone piece by piece. Captain Geordi shouted, "We're losing structural integrity." But Picard's focus was locked on Thawne. "Stop this," he said firmly. Thawne's expression shifted not to anger, not to rage, but to something colder, amusement. "What makes you think I started it?" And then he vanished. The red lightning dissipated, the duplicate Enterprise disappeared, and everything went still to still. Data looked up from his console, his voice barely above a whisper. Captain Picard turned. "What is it?" Data hesitated, and for the first time since anyone had known him, he sounded uncertain. "We are no longer in our own timeline." A silence fell over the bridge, heavier than anything before, because if that was true, then where were they? And more importantly, what had Thawne done to their reality? What if the universe they were standing in had never known the Federation at all? The realization didn't come all at once. It crept in quiet, insidious, undeniable. The stars outside the Enterprise viewport looked the same at first glance, but Data was already shaking his head before anyone else could even articulate the difference. "Captain, stellar positions are inconsistent with known galactic charts," he said. "Constellations have shifted by margins too large to be explained by natural drift." Picard stepped closer to the screen, his eyes narrowing. "How far off?" Data paused. "Approximately 300 years. A ripple of disbelief passed across the bridge. "What if we didn't just move through space, but fell into a future that should never exist?" "Long-range scans," Riker ordered. "Find the nearest Federation outpost." Worf's fingers moved swiftly across his console, but the result came faster than expected. "There are no Federation signals within range." The words landed like a shockwave. "Expand the search," Picard said, though something in his voice suggested he already knew the answer. "There are none," Worf repeated, more firmly this time. Silence, because the Federation wasn't just an organization, it was a constant, a presence that spanned thousands of systems. The idea that it simply wasn't there, it was unthinkable. And yet what if Thawne didn't destroy the Federation, but erased the possibility of it ever existing? "Captain," Data continued, "I am detecting transmissions, but they do not match any known Starfleet frequency." On screen the display shifted, revealing a fragmented signal, distorted, aggressive, filled with static. Then, slowly, it stabilized. A face appeared, harsh, severe, unforgiving. "Identify yourselves," the figure demanded. Picard straightened. "This is Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Federation starship Enterprise." The man's expression darkened not with recognition, but with suspicion. "There is no Federation," he said flatly. The bridge seemed to freeze around Picard. What if, in this timeline, peace was never achieved? "We come in peace," Picard replied, steady despite the tension. The man let out a humorless laugh. "Then you are either fools or liars." Behind him, the image widened, revealing a fleet of warships, not explorers, not diplomats, weapons. "Power signatures indicate heavily militarized vessels," Worf growled. "They are locking weapons." "Wait," Riker said. "We're not here to fight." "Too late," the man interrupted. "You've already violated restricted space." The transmission cut. and seconds later multiple vessels incoming. Worf barked. The stars lit up with incoming ships, dozens of them, surrounding the Enterprise in a tightening formation. What if this universe never learned to explore, only to conquer? Red alert, Picard commanded. Shields up. The first volley struck, like thunder phasers slamming into their defenses with brutal precision. The Enterprise shuddered, systems straining under the sudden assault, shields holding at 80%, Worf reported. Return fire but target their weapon systems only, Picard ordered. Phasers lanced out, striking the nearest ships but, unlike Starfleet vessels, these didn't hesitate, didn't retreat. They pressed harder. What if this timeline wasn't broken, but perfected for war? They're not responding to hails, Geordi said, frustration bleeding into his voice. It's like they don't even consider communication an option, because in their history, Data added, there may never have been a reason to. Picard clenched his jaw, because he understood now, if the Federation never existed, then its ideals never spread. No alliances, no peace treaties, no shared understanding between worlds, only conflict. What did you do, Thawne? Picard thought. As if in answer, a streak of red lightning tore across the bridge. Thawne was back, standing casually near the captain's chair, watching the battle unfold with visible delight. Oh, don't look so surprised, he said. You're the ones who wanted to explore new worlds. What if you'd brought them here, just to show them what they failed to become? Picard turned sharply. You altered the timeline. Altered? Thawne tilted his head. No, Captain, I removed a variable. What variable? Riker demanded. Thawne's smile widened. Hope. The word hit harder than any weapon. What if the Federation, the very idea of unity, was the one thing holding chaos back? Do you see it now? Thawne continued, gesturing toward the view screen as another barrage struck their shields. This is your galaxy. Without your precious Federation, no prime directive, no cooperation, just raw, unfiltered reality. The ship lurched again, harder this time, shields down to 60%. Worf shouted. You've doomed billions, Picard said, his voice cutting through the chaos. Thawne shrugged. Or maybe I've freed them. And then he was gone again. The red lightning faded, leaving only destruction in its wake. What if stopping him meant restoring something that never existed here? Captain, Data said urgently, I believe I have identified the point of divergence. Picard turned, where Data's gaze locked onto him. Earth. The word hung in the air. Approximately 250 years ago, Data continued. There is a significant temporal disruption centered on Earth's early warp development era. Riker's eyes widened. That's when the Federation was founded. Correct, Data said. In this timeline, something prevented that event. What if the moment humanity reached the stars was the moment Thawne decided to break them? Another explosion rocked the ship. Shields at 40%. Worf called out. We can't hold much longer, Captain. Picard didn't hesitate. Set course for Earth, he ordered. Maximum warp. Geordi blinked. Through that fleet, we have no choice, Picard replied. If that's where the timeline broke, it's where we fix it. What if the only way to save the future is to return to the moment it was stolen? The Enterprise surged forward, engines roaring as it pushed toward warp, but the enemy ships closed in, firing relentlessly, determined to destroy them before they could escape. Warp drive is fluctuating, Geordi warned. Hold it together, Riker urged. For a moment it looked like they might not make it. Then a flash of red lightning streaked across the hull, and suddenly, the pursuing ships froze, not disabled, not destroyed, frozen, as if time itself had stopped for them alone. What if Thawne wasn't trying to stop them, but guide them? The Enterprise leapt into warp. The battlefield vanished behind them. Silence returned, heavy, uncertain. Picard stared at the stars stretching into infinity. He let us go, Riker said quietly. Yes, Picard replied, but there was no relief in his voice, because he understood something the others hadn't yet. He wants us to reach Earth. What if this was never about stopping Thawne, but playing his game? Far ahead, across the fabric of a broken timeline, Earth waited, but not the Earth they knew. And as the Enterprise hurtled toward it, one question lingered. What would they find? At the moment everything went wrong. What if Earth, the birthplace of the Federation, had become the very thing it once stood against? The stars stretched and snapped back into place as the Enterprise dropped out of warp. For a moment, everything seemed normal. Blue oceans, white clouds, a familiar world suspended in the void. But the illusion shattered almost instantly. Captain, Geordi said slowly, his voice tightening. I'm reading orbital weapons platforms, hundreds of them. The view screen zoomed in. Earth was surrounded. Massive defense arrays encircled the planet like a catangula, aggressive, nothing like the peaceful orbital stations Starfleet once maintained. Energy signatures pulsed through them, weapons primed, scanning, waiting. What if humanity didn't unite the galaxy, but fortified itself against it? Hail them, Picard ordered. Before the signal could even be sent, they're locking weapons, Worf interrupted. Already, Riker muttered. No hesitation, no warning, just hostility. What if, in this timeline, Earth learned to fear the stars instead of explore them? Evasive maneuvers, Picard commanded. The Enterprise veered sharply as beams of concentrated energy slashed through the space it had occupied seconds before. The ship groaned under the strain, engines pushing to avoid the relentless barrage, shields holding at 70%. Worf reported. Return fire, he asked. Picard hesitated, because every instinct told him this was wrong. This wasn't an enemy. This was Earth. Target weapons only, Picard said at last. Phasers fired precise, controlled, striking the nearest platforms and disabling them one by one. But there were too many. What if Earth itself had become the gatekeeper, preventing its own future from ever happening? Captain, I'm detecting incoming vessels from the surface, Data said. The view screen shifted again. Ships sleek, powerful, but unfamiliar rose from the atmosphere, forming a defensive line between the Enterprise and the planet below. These designs, they're advanced, Geordi said. But they're not Starfleet, because there is no Starfleet, Riker replied grimly. A transmission cut through the chaos. Unidentified vessel, a stern voice declared. You have entered restricted Terran defense space. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. Picard stepped forward. This is Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Federation. The voice snapped. That lie again. The screen flickered, revealing the speaker. A human officer. Uniform dark, severe, bearing insignia none of them recognized. But his eyes carried something familiar. Discipline, duty, and something else. Fear. What if humanity's greatest strength, its unity, was replaced by suspicion? We mean no harm, Picard said. We believe your timeline has been altered enough. The officer cut in coldly. You will surrender your vessel immediately. And if we refuse? Riker asked. The man's expression hardened. Then you will be destroyed. The transmission ended. What if there was no way to convince them, because they had never learned to trust? Captain, Data said quietly, I am detecting a temporal echo, originating from the surface. Picard turned sharply. The divergence point. Yes, Data confirmed. It is centered in a region historically known as Bozeman, Montana. Riker blinked. That's where Zephram Cochrane, Picard finished. The name carried weight. History. The man who, in their timeline, built the first warp drive. The man whose flight had drawn the attention of the Vulcans, leading to first contact. The moment that changed everything. What if that moment never happened the way it was supposed to? We need to get down there, Riker said. But with this much defense, Geordi shook his head. We'd never make it through undetected. For a moment, it seemed impossible. Then, a flicker, a ripple, a flash of red lightning. Thawne stood behind them once more. Uninvited, unchallenged, unstoppable. What if the only way to fix time is to follow the one who broke it? Oh, please, Thawne sighed, glancing at the tactical display. You're not seriously considering asking permission, are you? Worf stepped forward, hand on his weapon. You will leave this vessel. Thawne didn't even look at him. Relax, he said. If I wanted you dead, you wouldn't even remember existing. The room fell silent, because they knew he was right. What do you want? Picard demanded. Thawne smiled. I want you to see it, he said. The moment everything changed. The moment your perfect little future collapsed before it even began. And you'll just take us there? Riker asked, skeptically. Thawne's grin widened. Oh, I already did. The world shifted. Not gradually, not logically, instantly. The bridge vanished. The hum of the Enterprise disappeared. And suddenly, they were standing somewhere else. What if the past wasn't a place you traveled to, but a moment you were forced to relive? The air was colder, thinner. The smell of metal and fuel hung heavy around them. Picard looked up, and there it was, the Phoenix. Cochrane's warp ship, half finished, surrounded by scaffolding, exactly as history described it, except something was wrong. What if this wasn't the moment of humanity's greatest achievement, but its greatest failure? Voices echoed nearby. Workers, engineers, soldiers. Riker frowned. That's not right. Data scanned the area. Captain, I am detecting heightened military presence inconsistent with historical records. Picard's gaze hardened, because he could see it now. Weapons, guards, tension. This wasn't a hopeful first step into the stars. This was something else, something darker. What happened here? Picard asked. Thawne stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back like a man admiring a masterpiece. Watch, he said simply. Footsteps approached. A man emerged from the shadows, disheveled, brilliant, driven. Zephram Cochrane, but he didn't look like a dreamer. He looked desperate. What if the man who was supposed to unite humanity never got the chance? Cochrane barked orders, his voice sharp, impatient. The workers scrambled to obey, fear evident in their movements. This doesn't feel right, Riker muttered. It isn't, Picard replied. Because their history had always described this moment as chaotic. Yes, but filled with possibility. This felt like something waiting to break, and then a sound, not from the present, not from the past, but from somewhere in between. A crack, like glass under pressure. Thawne's smile widened. Oh, here it comes, he said softly. What if the moment they were about to witness was the exact second time shattered? Picard stepped forward, his voice firm. Whatever you've done, we will undo it. Thawne didn't even turn. You still don't get it, Captain, he said. This isn't something I did. He glanced over his shoulder, eyes gleaming. This is something I made happen. And then the sky above Bozeman tore open. Not with fire, not with light, but with something far worse. Time itself. Splitting apart. What if the moment humanity first touched the stars was also the moment it lost its future forever? The sky above Bozeman didn't just crack, it unraveled. Lines of light fractured across the atmosphere like veins of something alive, pulsing, shifting, collapsing inward and outward at the same time. It wasn't an explosion. It wasn't an anomaly. It was time, failing. Picard staggered slightly, steadying himself as the ground beneath his feet seemed to ripple not physically, but temporally. The air felt heavier, like it was resisting existence itself. What are we seeing? Riker demanded. Data's voice was tight-strained in a way none of them had ever heard before. Captain, multiple temporal states are converging on this exact moment. The past, present, and future are overlapping in unstable layers. What if this isn't just the breaking point, but the collision of everything that ever was and ever will be? Around them, reality began to glitch. One moment, the Phoenix stood incomplete, surrounded by scaffolding. The next it was fully assembled, gleaming under a different sky. Then gone entirely, replaced by scorched earth and debris, as if it had never been built at all. Cochrane himself flickered between states, confident, terrified, wounded, even dead. Riker took a step back. This is impossible. No, Picard said quietly, his eyes locked on the chaos unfolding. This is intentional. What if Thawne didn't just break time, but forced every possible version of it to exist at once? Thawne stood at the center of it all, unmoved, unaffected. The storm of fractured reality twisted around him like a controlled experiment. Beautiful, isn't it? He said, almost reverently. Picard turned sharply. You're tearing reality apart. Thawne sighed. No, Captain, I'm showing it for what it really is. He gestured toward the sky, where entire segments of history flashed into existence, fleeting, unstable. You see time as a straight line, beginning, middle, end, but it's not. It's a web, fragile, tangled, and very, very easy to snap. What if the universe was never stable, just carefully held together until now? A sudden surge of energy pulsed through the area. The ground cracked not physically, but in layers revealing glimpses of other moments beneath. Picard saw Starfleet ships, hundreds of them exploring distant galaxies. Then war, then nothing. Riker saw himself older, standing on the bridge of a different Enterprise. Before the image shattered into darkness, Worf saw battlefields across the stars, glorious victories that dissolved into endless defeat. And Data saw timelines where he never existed. What if the future wasn't being erased, but replaced by infinite alternatives? Captain, Data said urgently, the divergence point is stabilizing into a single outcome. Picard's eyes snapped to him. Which outcome? Data hesitated. I do not know, he admitted, but it is being chosen. Right now. What if time itself is deciding which reality survives? Cochrane stumbled forward, clutching his head as the chaos intensified around him. He looked up at the fractured sky, fear etched into every line of his face. This isn't supposed to happen, he muttered. This isn't how it goes. Picard moved toward him. "Mr. Cochrane, listen to me." But Cochrane recoiled. "Who are you? What is this? What if the one man who could create the future no longer believed in it?" Before Picard could answer, a flash of red lightning. Thawne was there again, standing between them. "Oh, I wouldn't bother," he said casually. "He's seen too much already." Picard's voice hardened. "What did you do to him?" Thawne tilted his head. "I showed him the truth." "And what truth is that?" Thawne's smile widened, but there was something darker behind it now. "That none of this matters." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. What if the moment that inspired humanity to reach the stars was replaced by despair? Cochrane shook his head, backing away. No, this isn't real." "It is," Thawne said softly. "Every version of your future, every possibility, war, peace, extinction, triumph." He stepped closer, "and none of it changes the fact that you're insignificant." What if one man's doubt was enough to erase an entire future? Picard moved forward, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Don't listen to him." Cochrane looked at him, uncertain, desperate. "You don't understand," Picard continued. "What you're about to do, it changes everything. It inspires people. It creates something greater than any one of us, or it destroys everything." Thawne interrupted. The two men stood on opposite sides of Cochrane, hope and despair. What if the future of the entire galaxy came down to this one choice? The sky above them cracked, further reality, straining under the weight of infinite outcomes, collapsing into one. Data's voice rose. "Captain, the timeline is nearing irreversible collapse." "How long?" Riker shouted. "Seconds." Picard stepped closer to Cochrane, his voice steady, unwavering. "You build that ship," he said. "You take that flight. And when you do, everything changes." Cochrane's hands trembled. "But what if it doesn't?" he whispered. "What if Thawne is right, and nothing matters?" For a moment, it looked like Cochrane might walk away, like history might end right here, and Thawne smiled. "Oh, this is the part I love," he said. What if the moment of decision had already been decided? Suddenly, another surge, stronger than before. The sky didn't just crack this time, it shattered. Fragments of reality broke apart like glass, revealing something beyond something vast, incomprehensible, a void between moments, and within it, movement. What if breaking time didn't just destroy the universe, but attracted something far worse? Data's eyes widened. "Captain, I am detecting entities." "Entities," Riker echoed. "Existing outside of linear time," Data said. "They are observing." Thawne turned toward the fracture, his expression shifting for the first time. Not fear, not exactly, but something close. "Well," he said slowly, "that's new." What if even Thawne didn't fully understand what he'd unleashed? The air grew colder, the light dimmed, and from beyond the broken sky, something began to reach through. What if the things reaching through the broken sky weren't just watching time collapse but feeding on it? The fracture above Bozeman widened, not like a tear in fabric, but like an opening eye, vast, patient, and aware. The light around it dimmed, as if reality itself were being drained, pulled toward that impossible void between moments, and then they emerged. Not fully, not completely, but enough. Shadows, no, not shadows. Shapes that refused to stay defined. They shifted with every blink, existing in multiple forms at once, as though each version of them from every possible timeline was trying to occupy the same space. What if these weren't invaders, but consequences? Data's voice trembled, not with fear, but with something deeper. "Strain, Captain. These entities are not bound by causality. They exist simultaneously across all temporal states." Riker's eyes narrowed. "In plain English, they are not from the future," Data said, "or the past." A pause. "They are from outside time itself." The ground beneath them buckled, not physically, but existentially, as if the concept of here was losing meaning. Cochrane dropped to his knees, clutching his head. "Make it stop. Make it stop." Picard reached for him, but hesitated as one of the entities stretched downward, its form unraveling into countless possibilities. What if touching them meant becoming part of something that had no beginning and no end? Thawne stepped back for the first time, subtle but undeniable. His smirk faded just slightly. "I didn't invite this," he muttered. What if, for the first time, Thawne had lost control of the timeline? The air pulsed again, stronger now. One of the entities extended further into reality, its presence distorting everything around it. Time fractured in waves, moments looping, splitting, colliding. Picard saw himself speaking, then not speaking, then dying, then never existing. Riker saw the Enterprise destroyed in 100 different ways all at once. Worf saw battle but without victory, without honor, just endless, meaningless conflict. And Data saw something he could not process. What if even logic couldn't survive what was coming? "Captain," Data said, his voice breaking into static for a fraction of a second. "They are consuming unstable mines, collapsing them into singularity points." Riker looked up sharply. "You're saying they're feeding on the damage?" "Yes," Data replied. "And as the timeline continues to fracture, their presence will increase exponentially." What if Thawne didn't just break time, but rang a dinner bell for something beyond comprehension? Thawne's expression hardened. He stepped forward again, eyes locked on the expanding tier. "No," he said under his breath. "No, no, no. This isn't how it works." Picard turned to him. "You didn't expect this." Thawne snapped his gaze toward him. "Of course I didn't. Time isn't supposed to fight back, it's supposed to break." Another entity began to push through, its form larger, more defined, if defined, even applied. Its presence alone caused the Phoenix to flicker wildly between existence and absence. What if the universe itself was rejecting Thawne's manipulation? "Then fix it," Picard said sharply. Thawne laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Fix it, Captain. I don't fix things, I make them worse." Another pulse, stronger. The sky screamed not audibly, but conceptually. The idea of sound itself seemed to distort as the fracture spread further. Cochrane looked up, tears in his eyes. What are those things? What if humanity's first contact wasn't with the Vulcans, but with something far more terrifying? Picard knelt beside him. "They're not supposed to be here." "Then why are they?" Cochrane asked, his voice cracking. Picard didn't answer, because he knew. They were here because of this moment, because of what Thawne had done, because of what hadn't happened. What if the absence of one event created a void big enough for something else to fill? Data turned toward Picard, urgency rising. "Captain, if the timeline does not stabilize, these entities will fully manifest. Once they anchor themselves to this reality, removal may be impossible." "How do we stop them?" Riker demanded. Data hesitated. "By restoring the original timeline." All eyes turned to Cochrane. "What if the only way to save reality is to make history happen exactly as it was meant to?" Cochrane shook his head. "I can't. I don't even know what's real anymore." Thawne watched him carefully, something calculating, returning to his expression. "Oh, this is perfect," he said softly. Picard shot him a glare. "Perfect. This is your fault, is it?" Thawne countered. "Or is this just what happens when you peel back the illusion?" What if Thawne still believed he was right, even as reality collapsed around him? Another entity reached through closer now, its presence warping the ground into shifting layers of time. Grass became metal, then ash, then nothing at all. It was anchoring itself. What if they were already too late? Captain Data shouted. "We are out of time." Picard stood, his voice commanding, resolute. "Mr. Cochrane, listen to me. None of this stops unless you take that flight." Cochrane looked at him, fear and doubt battling in his eyes. "And if I don't?" Picard didn't hesitate. "Then there will be no future left to save." The words hit hard, because this wasn't about one man anymore. This was about everything. What if the weight of the entire timeline rested on a single, fragile choice? Thawne stepped closer, his voice low, almost coaxing. "Or, you could walk away," he said. "Let it all end. No expectations, no legacy, just nothing." Cochrane's hands trembled. Two voices, two paths. What if this was the moment that decided not just one timeline, but all of them? Above them, the fracture expanded again, larger, darker, filled with movement. The entities were coming through, fully, and for the first time. Thawne looked uncertain. What if even the man who broke time couldn't outrun what came next? The ground split beneath them, not physically, but temporarily, pulling fragments of reality apart. The Phoenix flickered violently. The sky collapsed inward, and Cochrane closed his eyes. What if the man who was never meant to be a hero became the only one who could save reality? For a moment, just a moment, everything went still. Not because the chaos had stopped, but because the decision had been made. Cochrane's eyes opened, and something inside him had changed. The fear was still there, but buried beneath it now was something stronger. Not certainty, not courage, but resolve. What if belief didn't come from knowing the future, but choosing to create it anyway? "I don't understand any of this," Cochrane said, his voice unsteady but firm. "I don't know what's real, what's not, or who any of you really are." He looked at the Phoenix flickering between broken and whole. existing and erased. But I built that ship, he continued, and I was supposed to fly it. Picard stepped forward slightly, hope rising, but carefully, cautiously. Yes, he said, you were. Cochrane nodded slowly. Then, I guess, that part still matters. What if the simplest truth was the one thing time couldn't break? Above them, the fracture roared wider now, darker, the entities pressing closer, their forms beginning to solidify in this reality. The ground shifted again, layers of time grinding against each other like tectonic plates. Data's voice cut through the moment. Captain, the entities are stabilizing. We are approaching irreversible convergence. How long? Riker demanded. Less than 1 minute. What if they were already standing at the edge of the end? Thawne watched Cochrane carefully, his expression unreadable now. You really think this changes anything? He asked, almost quietly. You think one little flight fixes all of this? Cochrane met his gaze. I don't know, he admitted. A beat, but I'm going to do it anyway. Something flickered in Thawne's eyes. Not anger, not amusement. Something unexpected. What if, for the first time, Thawne couldn't predict the outcome? Cochrane turned and started toward the Phoenix. Each step felt heavier than the last, not physically, but temporally. Reality resisted him, pulling at his form, trying to rewrite him, erase him, scatter him across the fractured timeline. Picard moved to follow, but Thawne blocked his path. No, Thawne said. Riker stepped forward. Move. Thawne didn't even look at him. This is the part where you watch, he said. What if even Thawne needed to see how this ended? Cochrane climbed the scaffolding, hands gripping metal that flickered between existence and nothingness. The ship groaned, not with mechanical strain, but with temporal instability. Above, one of the entities reached further through the fracture, its form now massive, looming, its presence bending reality around it. What if the flight had to happen before they fully arrived? Captain, Data said urgently, the Phoenix is not stable. It may not survive ignition. Picard's jaw tightened. It doesn't have to survive, he said quietly. It just has to fly. What if success wasn't measured by survival, but by impact? Cochrane reached the cockpit. He paused, looking out over the broken world below, the figures watching, the sky collapsing, the impossible unfolding. He hesitated, just for a second, and in that second, Thawne moved, a streak of red lightning gone from the ground, appearing inside the cockpit. What if the final obstacle wasn't fear, but Thawne himself? No, Picard said under his breath. Inside the Phoenix, Thawne stood behind Cochrane, his voice low, almost personal. You don't have to do this, he said. You don't have to be anything. Cochrane didn't turn. I know, he said. Thawne tilted his head. Then why? A pause. Because the answer mattered. What if the reason humanity reached the stars wasn't logic or destiny, but something far more human? Cochrane took a breath. Because maybe it does matter, he said. Maybe it all matters, even if I don't understand it. Thawne was silent. For a long moment, then he laughed. But it wasn't the same laugh as before. It was quieter, sharper. Hope, he said, always comes back to that. What if the one thing Thawne hated most was the one thing he could never fully destroy? The engines of the Phoenix flickered to life, unstable, fighting existence itself. Outside, the entities surged forward, their forms anchoring, reality bending to accommodate them. Captain, Data shouted. We are out of time. Picard stepped forward, his voice cutting through everything. Mr. Cochrane now. Inside the cockpit, Cochrane's hand hovered over the controls. Thawne stood behind him, watching, waiting. What if the fate of every timeline came down to this single moment? Cochrane closed his eyes. Then he engaged the engines. The Phoenix roared to life, not smoothly, not cleanly, but powerfully. It tore free from the ground, ripping through layers of unstable reality as it ascended. What if this flight wasn't just through space, but through time itself? The sky reacted instantly. The fracture pulsed violently. The entities recoiled not in fear, but in disruption. Their forms destabilized as the timeline began to resist them. It's working, Riker shouted. Temporal alignment increasing. Data confirmed. The original timeline is reasserting itself. What if history itself was fighting to come back? The Phoenix climbed higher, faster, its engines screaming against the pressure of a collapsing reality. But it wasn't enough. The largest entity pushed forward again, stronger than before, anchoring itself with terrifying force. What if restoring the timeline wasn't enough to stop what had already entered it? Data's voice shifted, urgent, alarmed. Captain, even if the timeline stabilizes, The entities have already established partial existence. They may persist beyond the reset. Picard's expression hardened. What are you saying? Data looked at him. We may save the timeline, but lose the universe. A silence fell heavy. Impossible, because this wasn't victory. Not yet. What if fixing the past still wasn't enough to save the future? Above them, the Phoenix reached the threshold of warp. The exact moment, the moment that was supposed to change everything. And below, the entities prepared to break through completely. Thawne stood in the cockpit, watching it all unfold. And for the first time he didn't look certain. What if the end of everything was something even he couldn't outrun? What if saving time required destroying the one man who could never stop breaking it? The Phoenix pierced the sky engines, screaming as it pushed toward the impossible threshold. Reality bent around it, folding and unfolding like a heartbeat struggling to survive. For one fragile, critical moment, history was trying to correct itself, and it almost worked. The fracture above Bozeman pulsed violently as the timeline surged back into alignment. The entities recoiled, their forms destabilizing, flickering between existence and absence as the past began to reassert its dominance. "It's happening," Riker shouted. "The timeline's restoring. Temporal coherence at 70%, 80, 90. Data's voice rose with urgency. But then, it stopped. Not reversed, not broken again. Just stopped. What if time didn't snap back into place, because something was still holding it apart? The largest entity surged forward, anchoring itself with terrifying force. Its presence pressed down on reality like a weight too great to bear, halting the restoration mid-process.